What's up, y'all? Welcome into episode 67 of the Two Stripes Podcast, the podcast that covers everything happening in the world of college football. My name is Colton Denning, and I am your host, coming to you on a Wednesday night in the lovely town of Oakland, California. I hope you all are having a fantastic week and are grinding through this one as we gear up for the weekend, a big weekend in football with the NFL draft and spring games happening all around the country, spring practices wrapping up everywhere. It feels like we're getting closer to football season, and I like it a lot. Before I get into today's episode, I want to tell new listeners, first, thank you for tuning into the show, and second, where they can find the show, and that is soundcloud.com/twostripespod. It's also on YouTube, youtube.com/Colton Denning, along with some great college football highlights, which you'll hear a little bit about in today's interview. And then thirdly, and most importantly, by subscribing onto Apple Podcasts. Just search the Two Stripes Podcast, and you can find this episode and every other episode of the Two Stripes Podcast there. You can also leave me some feedback, comments, reviews, anything that can help me make the show better. Please do that. And I am on Twitter @DubsCo. Today's episode is another season preview, and usually I do about a 3-minute intro, maybe 3.5-minute intro. I hate every single one of these every time I record them because I just ramble on. I'm not going to do that today because today we're talking about Alabama. And if you're literally anybody who follows college football, you know who Alabama is, you know what Alabama does, and you probably know a lot of their players, and you damn sure know their head coach. So I'm not going to drone on endlessly, but today's guest is Brad Canning, who is one of the contributors for RollBamaRoll.com, and we spent about 30 minutes the other day just chatting about Bama, the plethora of 5-stars that they have, what Nick Saban's mindset is, and everything Crimson Tide. And quite honestly, it was probably the first time that an Alabama and Ohio State fan have had this cordial of a discussion, so that was great too. With all that in mind, let's get right to it. Here's Brad Canning of Roll Bama Roll. I am joined by a very special guest, one of the contributors over at Roll Bama Roll, and his name is Brad Canning. Brad, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well, Colton. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and you know, when I do these season previews, I tend to stick to not like under-the-radar teams or smaller teams, just teams that don't usually get talked about, and finally I was just like, you know what? I haven't done an Alabama episode. I got to talk about Bama and see where they're at and see where everything's going. And I am very excited for this episode. I know you were just at the Alabama spring game. It's so hard to take away tangible stuff from a spring game, but just diving right into it, you know, the last game we saw Alabama was the national championship. And how nice is it for not only the fans, but just everybody involved with the program to just kind of finally move past everything that happened against Clemson and just be able to be like, hey, look, we're on to the 2019 season. We know what we need to do. We know what happened last year, but we finally moved on.
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I started moving on before the second quarter of that game when Clemson got their second, 3rd and 17 conversion. You know, I already started accepting defeat. You know, I talked with Peter Burns after the week after the national championship game, and he asked my co-host and I, he said, what was worse, you know, getting your ass kicked 44, to 16, or losing on a fluke play or a last minute play like 2nd and 26 against Georgia or the kick 6 against Auburn in 2013. And I told him straight up, you know, I would rather get my ass kicked because I can start accepting it throughout the game. I know we have no choice, no chance, versus the way the kick 6 unfolded or, losing the way Georgia did. So I've had months to move on and already set extreme expectations for this year's team. And I have a feeling most of the fan base was the same. And, I think we kind of saw that as well over the last 2 months on social media as spring practice fired up. And then, listening to people in their conversations when I was in Tuscaloosa last weekend. Not only has the team not skipped a beat of moving forward, the fan base hasn't either.
The funny thing about that, too, is a guy like Nick Saban in a sick way is probably like, yes, now I can really remind these guys that they aren't that good, and they'll finally believe it after what happened in the title game. Like, guys like him can use that and propel, and not that they need any extra motivation or lacking for talent, but I think guys like that, Greg Popovich, Bill Belichick, there's that part in their brain where every once in a while, not that they're okay with losing like that, but it also it drives a point home to their guys that, hey, it's not just going to be a cakewalk every year. This can happen to us too.
Yeah, look, he'll never celebrate success. He's very well on record by saying the losses haunt him more than any of the wins. But a part of him kind of had a little bit of gratification, maybe not in the moment, but afterwards for the returning guys for this upcoming year's team. And I made the case in 2017 when we lost to Clemson on the Hunter Renfrow pick play at the end. I made the case then that if you wanted Nick Saban to retire soon, him losing that national championship game in 2017 damn sure isn't helping his case. It's only going to motivate him more. And I think you're going to see that again this year, because a lot of the wishing has been going on for about a decade now of like, he needs to, get the hell on from Alabama, let somebody else be on top. Well, I don't know necessarily how much longer he has, but I can tell you, I don't know if he's ever been more motivated than he is going to be this upcoming year because of the way he lost. I mean, that's Alabama's worst loss since Nick Saban beat the hell out of him in 2004. So as ironic as that was, I think he's motivated more now because you look at the recruiting side nationally too. They're going to be talking about he's 67. He just got his hip replaced. They got their ass kicked. So there's going to be so many negatives to it. And I think he's going to try to make a point this year.
Yeah, best wishes to Coach Saban on that hip replacement the other day. I don't know if I'm buying it. I think that's like a software upgrade more than it was a hip replacement, but best wishes to him. He'll be at the NFL draft. He knows what to do and knows how to get that program front and center. But on the subject of Saban and about the coaching staff, there's at least 6 new coaches on this coaching staff this season. Is that kind of right now the macro big story heading into the year is the shakeup on the coaching staff? Because it always seems like they have some, but this year it seemed like it went to the extreme.
Yeah, when you think about it, it's been, I believe, 4 years since Alabama's returned the same offensive and defensive coordinator for at least a 2-year-in-a-row span. They've had the revolving doors basically every year, and you saw some familiar faces come back. I can tell you the initial reaction of Steve Sarkisian being named the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach after Mike Locksley goes to take the head coaching gig at Maryland. That reaction was not well received initially, but I think the fan base has kind of warmed over to him being back. And I'm glad they did, because he got dealt a very shitty hand with how things went down behind the scenes with Lane Kiffin after the SEC championship game that year and having to take over in the national championship game. So, he's back as the offensive coordinator. Tosh Lupoy leaves, goes to Cleveland. Now you have Pete Golding, who was the co-DC last year with Tosh. He's now the full defensive coordinator, inside linebackers coach. But you also have a familiar face in Sal Sunseri coming back to coach the outside linebackers. Sal's been a guy that's been in football for damn near his whole life. He had a son play at Alabama. He's a really good coach. You had a pretty couple good young coaches. See, last year's coaching staff was, I think, too young and didn't gel together with the way Saban wanted to approach things. And he's at that age where he's not going to change the way he does things, with his staff. So I have a feeling the way he did his hires this year was more based on where those guys came from and what they've been through. And a lot of these guys, if you start tracing the hires that he made, you'll see that they have a similar background as a younger Saban, and they've kind of have the same mentality as well. So to me, it is a big storyline for this year. But to be honest with you, the entire 85-man roster, about 70 of them are 4- and 5-star players. I mean, hell, you and I can get out there and we can probably do a pretty damn good job as a coordinator.
All right, listen, I just saw Greg Schiano as a defensive coordinator at Ohio State, and I might dispute that when it comes to the 4- and 5-star talent a little bit. But shout out to Vinny Sunseri, Sal Sunseri's kid. Epic interception return against Johnny Manziel. A great low-key moment from a low-key player. And I like to think that Saban almost goes out of his way to hire coaches that, like Steve Sarkisian, like Lane Kiffin, like Mike Locksley, that have these bad reputations, to just be like, let me see if I can do this. Let me see if I can rehab this guy. And as of right now, it's really working. And you're also seeing it on the offensive line with Kyle Flood. Before we move on from the coaching, who are you most intrigued by on this staff that's new, and who, for lack of a better word, concerns you the most?
It wouldn't be fair for me to say the same coach for both answers, because my initial reaction would be I'd be most concerned and intrigued to see what Steve Sarkisian in a full year can do with this offense. But I would say I'm intrigued with him because I think he would have to purposely try to not have success on the field with the talent this offense has. So I'm not worried about him. Who I'm more worried about is Pete Golding now having that full control over the defense. It didn't come out until after the season, but I had heard midway through the season last year he was already doing more than 50% of the plays called and the stunts on the line and everything, even though Tosh was perceived as the front man on the defensive coordinator positions. So I'm concerned with him now having full control, losing what we lost on defense, and seeing without the depth really at inside linebacker for this year, how he can overcome that with this defense. Because there is some question marks, but I mean, it's Alabama. They have question marks on defense damn near every year with the talent they lose. So we'll see. I mean, I would say Steve intrigues me and Pete concerns me right now.
It's interesting that you bring up Pete Golding, because I read that article in The Athletic, I think it was about a month ago, about kind of his story and how he ended up at Alabama. And earlier you talked about Saban kind of having a proclivity to hire guys that he sees a lot of himself in. And Golding was not an unknown name because, you as in the coaching world, you kind of know everybody. But he was a name I think that people were really surprised that popped up at Alabama, and now he's the defensive coordinator. But he also seems like he has a really bright mind, and like you said, Saban probably sees a lot of him in Pete Golding.
He does, and I have a feeling the reason why, because look, Oklahoma and Mississippi State made a huge run at Pete Golding. Oklahoma damn near matched the offer we gave Pete, and I think Saban sees something long-term with him. Now, I'm not saying he's grooming him or anything like that, because I'm of the opinion that a former defensive coordinator who's now a head coach at Tennessee is the replacement for Nick Saban, not Dabo. We're not going to go on that tangent yet. But I do believe he could be the best defensive coordinator we've had since Jeremy Pruitt was in Tuscaloosa, because ever since Pruitt left, the big thing we've been missing is the knots, the non-offensive touchdowns. Those things have taken a massive drop. We've been slow on getting to the quarterback in the beginning of the season. So Pete's he's really smart. He's up and coming. He had a hell of a year at UTSA that year, gets hired at Alabama, great recruiter. So with Pete, I think the ceiling is very high for him in terms of what he's going to be able to do at his career, whether it's at Alabama or, I mean, it's not a stretch for me to say if he goes somewhere else after this season.
Well, and I think that was a great point you made about him as potentially a long-term guy, because even if schools like Oklahoma and others are after him, Alabama has the money. And also, even though it doesn't seem like Nick Saban has a problem being able to hire people who are smart to run the defense, and of course he plays a big role in that himself, there isn't going to be any big name programs that come calling for Pete Golding right away, you would think, even if the defense is what it should be, is one of the best in the country, and maybe that's a smaller school, but he does kind of seem like he could be a long-term fit for them defensively, at least for a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would expect if Alabama has its typical top 10 defensive statistical year this year again, I would expect some group of 5 schools to possibly make a run at him offering a head coaching job. But I don't know. It's too early to say how seriously he would consider it, because I think his end game in Alabama is going to be far greater than jumping into a first-time head coaching role.
Yeah, so we haven't talked at all about play. We're like 10 minutes into this, and we haven't mentioned a player like once, which is crazy given all the talent that Alabama has, and we haven't really talked about the offense. But let's do that right now and talk about how some of those pieces that Steve Sarkisian has to work with. we know about Tua. He's been the story of college football the past couple of seasons, but this year, at least from the outside, from my perspective, this really kind of just feels like it's his team. Beyond just the Jalen Hurts stuff and the quarterback battle, Josh Jacobs and Damian Harris are gone. Some of the receivers are younger players. I think there's a new tight end coming in. This really feels like, hey, it's his last go around, but it's also like this is Tua's team.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of weight on his shoulders, given that we're going to tweak some things to the offense as well. But he has arguably the best and deepest wide receiving core in the country.
Yeah.
He's got a backfield that I don't know how some people have forgotten about a guy named Najee Harris, but it's my opinion, and I've put the money already on him that I think he wins the Heisman this year. I think he is a more athletic, if you can believe this, a more athletic and quicker Derrick Henry. And he's built almost the same way. And I think we're going to be relying on him a lot this year. Offensive line is going to be better. We lost, Jonah Williams to the draft, but we're going to kick Alex Leatherwood from right tackle over to left tackle. A guy to keep an eye on that offensive line, his name's Jedrick Wills. He's going to play the right guard and left guard position. I think he is a guy that could move up some draft boards as a second-day draft pick after this season if he can stay healthy. Brian Robinson, he's a Josh Jacobs type story at running back in terms of really not recruited, 3-star. He was out of Tuscaloosa, so he's a local kid, and he has done nothing but wait his time, and now he is the true backup, and he's probably the better pass protection running back as well. So the offense, I think, is not really going to miss a beat, and to be honest with you, I won't be shocked. Alabama set school records last year for yards per game and points per game. I won't be shocked if they beat that record again this year if Tua stays healthy. Now, what throws everything off for this season is if Tua goes down, because this is the most unsure year at backup quarterback position since it was the Jake Coker and Cooper Bateman run in 2016, which Alabama still won a national championship. But that feeling of not knowing, who that man and if you can trust him is, because Tua's injury prone. I can't argue against that given his track record so far. So that concerns me over anything else on this team is the safety and the health of what we call our sweet Samoan prince.
On Najee Harris, I was sitting about 10 rows up in the Alabama end zone for that national championship game, and I think it was the first touchdown run that got called back of his. There were just some runs like that one where you could just see it. Like this guy is, I think he had the second most carries on the team last year, but just physically in the way that he runs is just a different level. And now that he is going to get that starting job, he's going to be the guy. It does kind of seem like he was so talented or touted in high school that like this is going to be the first look for everybody of like, this is Najee Harris. And something interesting about their running backs that stuck out to me is they've really just kind of gone with that by committee philosophy since probably about the 2016 season. Do you think that that's going to stick this year, or is Najee going to be the one to really put his stamp on the running game?
I think in the beginning it's going to kind of feel itself out because our true right guard starter that we want, Deontay Brown, he's suspended for 4 games. So with the offense being tweaked too as well, I think they want to see how everyone meshes during a game or two. So they may rotate backs in. Somebody's going to be a passing back too. Not saying that Najee, isn't going to have 20, 30 receptions this year, but there's a true freshman named Jerome Ford. I've heard good things about him through spring practice, and then I saw him a couple plays during the A-Day game, and I can see why they're talking about him the way they are. So I think it may be a 3 running back committee this year, but I fully expect when you start getting to that Texas A&M week, for the 4th, 5th week into the season, I fully expect it to be a Najee Harris show. And, he'll probably be averaging anywhere from 22 to 25 carries a game from that point on. And I made the jump. He was 40 to 1 odds on the Heisman. So if he pulls that off, I'm going to be a very happy man. So
I don't think that that's a bad bet. And on the flip side of that too, I was just, when I was doing prep for this, I was thinking about the running game and Josh Jacobs, and this is timely with the draft being, I think people are going to hear this on Thursday. So that night that Nick Saban is about to do some backflips on the recruiting trail when Josh Jacobs gets drafted in the first round. And it's not like he needs any extra help, but Jacobs had 251 total carries in his career. I don't think he ever surpassed 120. That was his highest last year, and he's about to be a first-round pick. Conversely, Travion Williams for Texas A&M had 271 just alone in 2018. So people always ask, how you see quarterbacks transfer all around the country, and then you see what Alabama has at running back, and I hear people all the time say, how can they manage that? These guys aren't the guy. They could go be the guy somewhere else. Well, if Nick Saban can go in your living room and say, hey, you're not going to be the guy, but I'm going to get you carries, you're going to be fresh by the time you get to the NFL, and you're going to be a first-round pick, that's a hell of a recruiting pitch.
Absolutely. It came down to the wire for the number one running back in this year's recruiting class. Trey Sanders, it came down to Georgia and Alabama. He's not on campus yet, full-time enrolled. So that dude is talented as hell. I don't know if you watched his film at IMG, but he's a guy that if Najee has the season I expect and he leaves after this year, yeah, I can fully see it, that committee thing moving on to the Trey Sanders era after that next year. But sticking with Josh Jacobs in the draft, I can remember 4 or 5 years ago when Todd Gurley was coming out, everyone saying, well, Todd had an injury, blew his ACL out, but he had so many carries. He's overworked. He's not worth a top 10 pick. Well, now with Josh, it's like he didn't have enough carries in his career. So what the hell is it? What's the knock to a running back? Is it too much or too little? Because in the too little, he showed he's got great potential if he's in the right system, like the Eagles, as an example. And I would think you'd want more tread on the tires than not. So I'm getting tired of the damn hypocrisy, I guess, a little bit.
Earlier on, you talked about Pete Golding and having some new pieces on defense to work with. And there's a ton of talent. We don't got to go completely in depth. We know Alabama, what they do in the front seven, especially on that defensive line. But even for them, losing Quinnen Williams is a huge deal. What are the names to watch out for them along that defensive line? And what do you expect, not only out of them, but out of this front seven?
So there's, I'll give you two names. Well, three. I'll give you three names. There's a true freshman coming in who's on 24/7 composite. He was the number one recruit in the country, Antonio Alfano. I think he is just an absolute freak. If you had to compare him to anybody, I think he has the potential, the size, the strength, everything as Jadeveon Clowney coming out of high school. There's a junior on the team who's going to play some on the nose. He might play a little bit more of the 3-4 technique. His name's LeBrian Ray. And then the one I would tell you about to replace Quinnen Williams, I think at nose tackle, about midway through the season, you're going to see a true freshman step up. His name's DJ Dale. He went to the same high school Deron Payne went to. When Deron went to Alabama, he took his spot at high school. Obviously Deron left 2 years ago. Quinnen filled the role. Now DJ is there to be that next man up. So he'll be splitting reps on the nose with a guy named Raekwon Davis. He's a 6'7" nose tackle, if you can believe that. But there's a couple young guys on this front seven, and on the front line alone, I think those are your main guys. But linebackers, man, this might be the least amount of depth on inside linebacker Alabama's ever had under Nick Saban. So that's the main concern on the defense. But there's a ton of talent. There's an edge rusher you're going to remember that was out all of last year who's a freak. His name's Terrell Lewis. So be on the lookout for a 6'5", 285 guy with 8% body fat. But yeah, look, I think there's going to be a ton of playing time, and you're going to see what Alabama wanted before, and you're going to see a lot of rotations, not only on the front four, but also within the linebacking core as well.
Not to self-plug even more on my own podcast, but Alabama fans, I have 8 minutes of Anthony Jennings highlights up on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning. Check it out. I know you're going to like that. What do you think the strength of this defense is going to be in 2019?
I think it's going to be the ability to disrupt the quarterback, and I also think they finally have the overall talent and experience in the back four and the nickel position as well since probably 3 years. So I think this year's team is going to be great in coverage. on downfield shots, maybe not over the middle with the linebacker, but I think that front line, defensive line, and this secondary is going to be the key to this year's run. And, it all goes with somebody leading that defense, and that's Dylan Moses. And I don't know if we've seen Dylan Moses fully shine yet. And, Saban, we talked about running backs. Saban always has that guy on the defense at a linebacker position that kind of gets everything in place, makes the checks, the audibles, everything. I'm going to be curious to watch him and his decision-making this year going into his junior year as well. But I wouldn't be shocked if Alabama's, again, top 10 defense overall, and they're probably in the top 5 to 8 on sacks overall.
That poor new Duke starting quarterback on August 31st. He's going to be in for a long day. What do you think are a couple things as we kind of wrap up here? What are a couple things that you think will define this team in 2019?
Well, it's the concern every year. So they could define this team if the number one kicker in the country coming in, Will Reichert, is actually a damn good kicker, something we haven't had during this dynasty. So that alone would define this team if he's good. But, I think it's going to be sort of like last year. You're getting gassed up by the media, the fan base, everything as potentially one of the greatest teams of all time, which I didn't agree with. And I think offense, like I said, could be better this year than it was last year if Tua stays healthy. So the complacency, the being where your feet are, if that team can do that, it's got the leadership. But if it can stay grounded, I think that's going to be why they have the success they want to. And, really, it's national championship or bust at this point. So to define this team as a success, they got to go meet Clemson for a fifth straight year in a row and, get revenge.
This may be on kind of the same track, but what's one thing you're most confident about for this team, and what's the thing that concerns you the most?
The one thing I'm most confident in is our schedule's pretty easy. I know that's the narrative every year, but I won't argue that one this year. There's 2 games that I think are pretty tough, but I'm pretty confident Alabama's going to make it through the regular season undefeated again and face Georgia in the SEC championship again. But I'm most concerned about our inside linebacker depth and the role that could play, because if you think back 2 years ago to when Alabama played Georgia in the national championship game, they had 7 linebackers go down that season. So they had the depth then. They don't have that now, and it's already a concern just for somebody starting. So that could be taken advantage of. Somebody's got to step up, and I don't know how big of an effect that's going to have on the team in the first few games, because the opponents they're playing are, shall we say, maybe not fully equipped to take advantage of an Alabama defense that may have a weak point. So hopefully they get it figured out before they face somebody like Texas A&M or LSU or Auburn.
Yeah, is that A&M game on the road October 12th? Is that one of those games you were talking about?
Absolutely. And if they make that thing a night game, I'm probably going to go to that, because I can't imagine that atmosphere at night.
Yeah, that is going to be, I think, one of the more marquee games of the season, especially if it's at night. And with what Jimbo Fisher is doing there, it's easy to see how they can maybe not be on the level of Alabama. I think that's just a little far-fetched, but given his pedigree and what they were able to do last year, they played some really good teams tough, and they played Alabama tough, and it wouldn't be a surprise to see that be a very hotly contested game.
Yeah, that's the one game I would say is the biggest trap game for Alabama this year. And keep an eye on Kellen Mond this year. I know you know about him, but he progressed so much in the second half of last year. Jimbo's always developed quarterbacks. I won't be surprised if he's having an outstanding year this year at Texas A&M.
Yeah, if you can get EJ Manuel and Christian Ponder to get taken in the first top 15 picks, like
Jesus.
you can do a lot with Kellen Mond. I usually on these I wrap up asking about expectations, but I feel like I can't do that on this one for obvious reasons, because the expectations are what they are, and like you said, it does seem like every year it's just national title or bust.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 4 straight national championship game appearances, so they're expecting that 5th one this year, and I think there's a good chance, but I have a feeling it's going to be a pretty tough round for whoever's in the playoffs this year.
And honestly, when I do these episodes, I ask that because I'm usually talking to fans of teams who are like, man, we just want to win 9 this year. Like, if we won 10 games, this would be awesome. And I always feel like such a jerk because being an Ohio State fan, I'm always like, I can't relate. Like, we won the Rose Bowl last year, and it was just, I was miserable last year, that whole season, and they lost 1 game. Like, I've been miserable the last 3 years. And so it's nice to get the same type of perspective from somebody else where it's like, hey, we're winning the title or we had a really bad season.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what 9 games feels like, for a whole season anymore. We're spoiled, man. I am well aware of it. So I take it in moment by moment more now than I ever have, because I know there's a day coming, and it's not going to be pretty of a reality check.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I've felt this way for the last 15 years, where I'm just like, every year that it's good, I'm riding the success, because one day you wake up and you're Tennessee. And that's the worst feeling in the world, and you don't want to have that.
Well, I'm glad we can agree on something there. So
Absolutely. I don't have any more questions for you, man. I feel like we hit all the macro stuff. Do you think there's anything else we need to touch on here before we get out of here?
No, I think that about covers it for Alabama. And I appreciate you, thinking I was good enough to come on here to represent Roll Bama Roll. It was a great time. I always love talking football, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. We're getting closer, and if you want to check out anything Alabama-wise, if you're not an Alabama fan and want to check out what's going on along the Alabama universe, not only football, but all Alabama athletics, be sure to check out Roll Bama Roll. Visit rollbamaroll.com. Follow them on Twitter at RollBamaRoll, and you can listen to Brad on the Roll Bama Roll podcast, and they are on Twitter at RBR Podcast. Brad, where else can they catch your work?
Well, they can find me on Twitter for all the bad and dad jokes they could have their heart filled with. I'm at Brad2524. And hopefully they won't find me in jail either. So that's that's about it. I'm a simple man.
That's all we can hope for in the college football offseason is, hey, we made it through another offseason, no jail time. Then that's you're in the good.
Absolutely, yeah. Nobody wants to win the Fulmer Cup in the offseason of all the rest.
Absolutely. Hey, Brad. Well, I really appreciate it. This was a hell of an episode, and hopefully we can talk later down the line.
Absolutely, Colton. I appreciate it anytime, and best of luck to Ohio State this year.
Big thanks to Brad for joining the show, although I do not believe him when he wishes Ohio State best of luck. I do appreciate him coming on the show, dropping knowledge, talking all things Alabama, and what the next season is going to look like for them. They're going to be in the playoff again. They'll probably be the 1 seed, and it's really just a matter of, is there another program outside of them and Clemson that, forget just winning the national championship, just make it to the playoff and be a threat to either of those teams. That is where we're at right now. And even Ohio State, they haven't been there since 2016, and the last time they were there, they got stomped by Clemson pretty good. So I would say that right now it's Clemson and Alabama and everyone else. So we'll see if anybody can join that conversation, or in the Buckeyes case, rejoin it. Alabama definitely has some interesting storylines this season that Brad talked about, whether it's the new coaching staff, putting new players in elevated positions, or just fight off that complacency that tends to come when you hear that you're the best from everybody but your coaching staff and the people outside of the walls of that program. And it's really amazing that Saban and Alabama have been able to stay on top for this long just when it comes to that, because those guys hear from everybody but them how good they are, and just every year they come out like a machine and they take care of business, and rarely do you catch Alabama off their game if you're not top level team. So that's maybe the most impressive thing I think about this run, is just the week to week, year to year, and really day to day when it comes to running a program, consistency that Saban, his staff, the support staff, and the players have been able to push through that complacency and put themselves in position every single year to win titles. And they'll probably be back this year, to all of our dismay. But you know what? When you run a program that good, more power to you, because Nick Saban, he's probably the best all time at it. I think and I hope that I have kissed enough Alabama ass on this show to get a couple of 5-star ratings from Crimson Tide fans. So, guys, hit that Apple Podcast page, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, leave a review about how I'm the most unbiased and most favorable podcast host ever, and I have nothing but respect in my heart for the Crimson Tide. But seriously, want to thank all of you for listening to the show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy it enough to come back for future episodes and stick around with me. This is a lot of fun to do. I'm a one-man show here. I try to make these episodes interesting. I know the production and the sound quality isn't the best, and I'm not one of those podcast people who's like, I'm going to fix it. No, I'm poor. I'm working on the budget I have right now, baby. We're chicken wire and shoestring, so we're running this thing until it's into the ground, but I love putting these out as much as I can. I'm going to try to do once a week here for the rest of the offseason and into the season, and I really and truly put everything I have into these episodes, and I hope that you love them as much as I like creating them. So if you do, please go to Apple and subscribe to the show and send me some feedback. I am on Twitter @DubsCo, and you can also find the show on SoundCloud, soundcloud.com/2stripespod, and on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Colton Denning. Alabama fans, I wasn't lying. Those Anthony Jennings highlights, 8 minutes of them, are up on the channel, as well as some current and former great college football players, including Clinton Portis, Percy Harvin, Mike Williams, Dwayne Jarrett, Ed Reed, a lot of dudes there. Chris Gamble, Maurice Clarett, a lot of good Ohio State players, and a couple of guys, if you're an NFL fan, like A.J. Brown, who Crimson Tide fans are pretty familiar with at Ole Miss, that are going to be taken high in this weekend's NFL draft. So be sure to check that out, youtube.com/Colton Denning, ColtonDenning. Whew, that is a lot of self-promotion, and the music that I am going to add after I record this is already rising up in my head and telling me to get out. But I want to say one last time, thank you for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Colton Denning, and this is the Two Stripes Podcast.